Welcome to another episode of SBI Lab Chats, your deep dive into Shake Flask bioprocessing. We are your hosts, Jens.
Hi, my name is Julius.
And welcome to today's episode. Last time we together looked at baffled Shake Flask, an episode that had quite some traction, and we also received some messages from you, so keep them coming. We're happy that the content resonated well. And before we go to today's topic, a quick reminder, why are we doing this podcast, Julius? We essentially said there's too much hidden Shake Flask knowledges in pretty dry publications, and that we still see too many people maybe not knowing enough about Shake Flask bioprocessing. So we said, okay, let's bring everything we have learned over the last 10 years into an entertaining format and bring it to people in a video podcast/broadcast format. And that's why you're here today. And that is also why we have chosen today a very polarizing topic, Julius, because we're becoming myth busters today. And the topic of today is busting Shake Flask myths, part 1. So there will be a part 2, but today we are focused on the myth that the Shake Flask is dead. As always, our little elevator pitch of why you should listen to this episode. We are first of all going to take a look at this myth, and then in a scientific way, try to basically prove it wrong. We are going to look at typical scale-up workflows and the modern bioprocess tool stack to kind of see what exists as an alternative to Shake Flask. And then we're trying to compare these platforms to really see, well, is the Flask truly dead? And if not, where does it have its place? Or it is the place. And then lastly, we're also going to take a look at the modern Shake Flask and how that fits into the overall bigger picture. And as always, we don't let you go home without a couple of takeaways. Before we dive right in, a disclaimer. We are mainly focused on the microbial world here today. For us, this means bacteria, fungi, even filamentous organisms. But we would be a bit careful to apply everything we say one-to-one to the cell culture work, meaning your CHO or hex cell cultures. So you can still listen and apply this, but it needs to be a bit more careful. All right, with this disclaimer, let's start with the first slide and the myth. And there is a common belief out there that the Shake Flask is dead. I have heard this actually myself when we built this company in 2014, and an investor told us, no, sorry, we just have invested into a microtiter plate company, and the Shake Flask will die over the next years, and that's why we're not on board. Of course, respected this, but also fair to say that this startup doesn't exist anymore, and we do. But I think the problem is bigger than just what I personally learned, because we just read it on LinkedIn again under an interesting post from somebody where somebody said, anyone who is still cultivating an Erlenmeyer flask today is stuck in the past. And I think this kind of beautifully summarizes a little bit about what some people truly believe or try to make you believe. So Julius, since I kind of was the person saying this is what people claim, you can't really use the flask, what do we have scientifically, because you find a nice diagram, to say maybe against this common belief?
I mean, we are both scientists by training, right? So I would say there isn't a better way to look at something than with experimental data or with data and with numbers. And we do have a nice chart from a review that came out in the beginning of this year, which is actually from the Aachen University, the chair of bioprocess engineering, which is called Pitfalls in Early Bioprocess Development using Shake Flask Cultivations. And they also looked at how relevant the Shake Flask still is, and they used publication numbers or numbers of publications per year. And you can see that the Shake Flask in the beginning was almost the only tool in the whatever 90s. But then later on, the microtiter plate also came to, let's say, a relevant part of the biotech publications or biology publications, and of course also the stirred bioreactors. However, all of them rising, yes, but still we see Shake Flask still on the rise and even still on top of all of them. So at least looking at this kind of data, we can definitely say the Shake Flask is not dead and maybe even more alive than ever.
But you also know, and I'm playing devil's advocate, that the people who make these type of statements, they will simply say, yeah, Julius, this is nice for academia, this may be true, and they may not disagree, but in industry, right, in the leading industrial companies, that's not the picture that we see there. There really is no shake flask there. So what do you say against that argument?
Well, having been in our sales team for 8 years and selling to many customers, and we as a company selling to customers globally, we still also see the shake flask everywhere within large companies, small companies, wide biotech, in pharma, almost everywhere in all the countries. And honestly, there are companies going away from shake flask, or I have seen in the recent years companies going away from the shake flask. I have seen companies reintroducing the shake flask because maybe also now some cool tools exist to optimize the usage of them. So yeah, it really is not as easy to say, and definitely not black and white that the shake flask is dead everywhere. It might be dead somewhere, but definitely not everywhere.
Margaret. I agree from my perspective, and you just said it yourself. It may be dead somewhere. So let's first of all see if that's the case and also where. And it's a nice transition to your next two slides, where you've taken the scientific way to really objectively see, okay, is it really true that the shake flask has been replaced by another technology? Because that's ultimately what the people are claiming here. So let's take a look at what you have found in your research there.
So where many presentations and talks start is this typical scale-up workflow. And this is only, let's say, exemplary now. There can be different scales, different tools, different vessels, but it starts on the left with, you need a lot of throughput, you need a lot of experiments because you do strain engineering, because you do mutagenesis, and you need, as I said, a lot of throughput, many things to compare, many strains, many different media compositions. And that usually starts at a very small or even the micro scale. So a few milliliters or even less than a milliliter. And then it goes through this kind of funnel. It becomes more the strain evaluation and maybe characterizations. Then with the early process development, you have a larger scale, you have less throughput. And there often, for example, the shake flask is needed. For example, with 10 ml to 1 liter. Then at one point you start using the stirred bioreactors, typically the 1 to 10 liter benchtop bioreactors for scaling up and further process development. And then at one point, obviously, you have production and pilot scale before production, which maybe has a few hundred liters and then maybe even more in the end. And what you definitely see is on the left side, smaller volume, more throughput. And it also means on the left side, you always have lower cost per experiments. And this is a recommended publication that is from 2023, where basically they also try to put $1 or €1 to each experiment. And while on the left side you have €1 or $1 kind of for each experiment, on the right side for a pilot bioreactor or production bioreactor, it's thousands of dollars. And that's already where you kind of see the dilemma. The larger volume, the well-controlled environment is a benchtop bioreactor or is a stirred bioreactor. But you can never start there because in the beginning you need more throughput, and that's why mostly people still use microtiter plates and or shake flasks to do so.
Yeah, maybe one comment from my end here, because later on we will see why we don't think the shake flask is dead. But one important thing is some people make this picture of, there's this standard process and it looks the same in every company. And I think what we have seen is really that sometimes one person is kind of doing all of this, obviously not going to pilot scale, but let's say starting from a strain to going to a benchtop bioreactor. Sometimes this is various people. Sometimes this is different departments. We've seen different departments in different countries. And then we have also sometimes even molecular biologists focusing more in the beginning and bioprocess engineers in the middle. So there is a lot of variety in this process. And I think, again, don't remember, we're talking about the shake flask is dead. And that would mean for the full complexity of all levels of this process, that right? It doesn't fit into any of those setups. That's kind of the claim that many people make. But yeah, you elaborated on some interesting technologies along those workflows, and I think that's where you were taking us next.
Yeah, we wanted to pick a few examples of Yeah, I would also say sophisticated technologies and tools that came out over the recent years, 10 to maybe 15 years, and which are now used a lot and have many advantages. But they also exist for every kind of scale, because as on the slide before, you can see on the left side, it's more about the throughput, about the strain development and screenings, high throughput screenings. So it's, for example, the bioreactor from M2P Labs, which was then bought by Beckman Coulter. Then, for example, if you go towards the shake flask and strain evaluation or maybe characterizations, you can use OTR measurements, for example, from the Kühner-Tom system, or for example, also with our DOTS platform, where you can monitor parameters within the flask. And then let's say the bioprocess development starts, and that's usually where at one point you use or you want to use the stirred bioreactor, and there the Ember 250 became really popular, while being a very expensive device, also a very sophisticated device, which offers this kind of throughput while still having, let's say a limited footprint, but the real benchtop bioreactor capabilities. And I would say a few years ago, this was the place where Eppendorf and the DustBox system was really successful, because they also tried to bring more throughput into a smaller footprint on the benchtop bioreactor scale. And what you also see is on the left side, it's more about the focus is more about monitoring. And on the right side, it's more about control. And you can also see where we are kind of in the middle, because we try to do both with our DOTS platform. But yeah, at one point you need control, and that's usually the stirred bioreactor. And in the beginning, you focus on monitoring because you need the throughput.
Yes, I have to make one comment that I just realized. Have you ever noticed that on this picture of the dust box, there's a shake flask holder in the middle of it? I mean, isn't this indirectly already showing how relevant the shake flask is? I just was wondering what it does there. But yeah, sorry to take this somewhere else. You see, this broadcast is not always serious.
But it's interesting.
Also no idea. Maybe for bottles or so. Highlighting that the shake flask is maybe not dead. It's just positioned next to bioreactors now. I think the transition that we are trying to make here now is the shake flask really dead? That would mean that all of these existing technologies for all of the workflows we've discussing before is always dead, right? I think that would be a fair statement. There's simply no place anymore where the shake flask truly has its space. And I think this is something that we try to break down into factors that could stand against that. So, meaning, for example, when people decide on which technology to use, they will look at things like the financial situation. How much budget do we have? How much available equipment? How much personnel do we have? How much OPEX for consumables do we have? They're going to look at potentially production requirements or data that they need. So, does this process need to have a certain OTR, or does this, or are we kept in the later production reactor? Do we need to operate under fed batch, or do we need to have a certain culture volume in order to do offline analytics, right? Then based on the application, I think this is the most important point here. Like, what are you actually trying to achieve? Are we building the strain? Are we optimizing a media? Are we really doing scale-up experiments? Am I testing a first idea of a media to see how my strain behaves? Or am I in the last fine-tuning of the media? And then obviously also, what type of setting am I operating at? Where does my team have experience and maybe feel comfortable, right? Like, what are personal preferences? And so again, just trying to highlight, if the shake flask is dead, it would mean that in all of those categories, in all of those settings, the shake flask is always at a disadvantage, and simply there is no place for it. And this is a very black and white view on things. And that's what we basically are against, because we believe strongly, and the next slide is showing this, in my opinion, nicely, that the user needs to pick a tool based on their personal situation, considering factors like this and capabilities of the systems and the workflow that they use. And then the reality becomes gray. And that's why there's, in our opinion, a space for all of those technologies. And we try to show this nicely here on this slide, Julius.
Yeah. Looking at this slide, I always think of one of our customers who said, like, each tool, each vessel, each scale has a kind of unique selling point, and you need to choose the scale, the tool, to basically match what you need. As we said beforehand, because otherwise it might just not be the best tool that you are using. So always using the same tool is probably not the right approach. And what we see over here is that you kind of have these two categories. And the first one is, let's say, the good old microtiter plates, maybe with plate readers, but not the sophisticated micro bioreactors. So the microtiter plates and the shake flask, also the good old shake flask that is only monitored offline, probably and manually, they are low cost. They are easy to use, and the throughput is good, or at least, let's say, for shake flask, acceptable. But the data on control is basically lacking. You only have offline data most of the time, and you probably don't even have any kind of control, no feeding, no pH control. And then you have this next category where, let's say, data on control is good or even very good, because they can do many things. Those are these sophisticated tools, the microbioreactors like the bioreactor, the benchtop bioreactors, the Amber 250, the DASCIP systems. But they're very expensive to buy. They are also very expensive to run. And they require, let's say, people who know these systems and maybe even have higher education. And then again, the throughput is also worse than the shake flask and definitely the microtiter plate. And that kind of highlights the dilemma that we have. The tools that are good on maybe one aspect, they are bad on the other aspect. And yeah, this is why you should always think about choosing the right tool and the right vessel for your next experiment.
Exactly. And when in conflict, then one should always look for common ground. So to the people who say the shake flask is dead, Julius and I would agree that you can argue if you want to do high throughput bioprocess development with lots of data under control, then the old shake flask, the simple glass beaker that you put in a shaker and just let be there, probably has lost relevance. That is correct. We would not disagree with this. Where we disagree, so to say, is that it is always the worst choice. And now, most importantly, it is kind of ignoring a little bit what has happened with the shake flask over the last 10 to 15 years. It's almost comparing modern tech like microbioreactors, multi-parallel bioreactors with the shake flask from 20 to 30 years ago. I understand that they try to paint a picture, but it's not a fair comparison. So let's maybe elaborate, Julius, a little bit on how the shake flask has evolved over the last years.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting to see and also fascinating to see, because we have really gone from the thing that we showed on the slide before, which is, easy to use, inexpensive, but no data, no control. So basically on the left side, we went to almost a mini bioreactor. And it's not only us working on this kind of mini bioreactor shake flask with a lot of control, with advanced sensing. It's also other companies. There's, for example, from Germany too, there is Presense focusing on the monitoring part. Then there is a startup from Denmark focusing on the control and feeding part. So it's also not only us believing in this kind of scale and transforming really the shake flask into a mini bioreactor. It's also other companies who are also sometimes even recently founded. And what we are really then trying to do is bridging the gap from the old shake flask, which is, as you can see on the right side, almost bad everywhere. There is no pH control. There is maybe pH offline monitoring. There is no feeding. Maybe people do manual feeding, but that's also not a good feeding option. The transition over to the modern shake flask that we currently have, where the control is already kind of there, where monitoring is there, and even becoming better and better. And then obviously, as we see on the right, the bioreactor is green everywhere. We try to also put a green plus everywhere for the modern shake flask. And then, of course, this whole big disadvantage of data and control that we talked about is gone for the shake flask, while, of course, we still try to keep the easy to use and not so expensive factors in there.
Exactly. And I think the important thing is to say, so first, we will see a bioreactor-like shake flask very soon in the future, where it is where you basically are able to take bioreactor experiments and run them on the shake flask level. And then you, in my opinion, really need to take a look again and where the shake flask is positioned and how dead it really is, because one could argue it's then as alive as ever. And the second thing that I personally think we shouldn't forget here is that there may be even further developments coming to it, where then the shake flask may get even better than what is highlighted in this table. And we're not going to make the claim here that the shake flask will replace all the other technologies. I don't see that because, like we said, it's application-based. But I do think that it will gain more momentum over the next 5 years than it probably has ever seen before. I think that we will see this because we also see how the markets currently are tight on bigger budgets and investments and so on, and cost effectiveness is becoming a huge topic. And some of these technologies are clearly outpriced for many segments, so there is a need for something like this. And that's also the not the last slide, but one of the key slides that we're going over to now is we could stand here as a shake flask company, say this is needed. But more importantly is we only develop this because we have listened to shake flask users all over the world and where they see a need for this technology, because it's never good as a company to just build something and say, here, take this, right? We develop this because we have people telling us, I would use a shake flask platform if it could do A, and here's what I would use it for. So we thought we bring this level to the table because this really highlights nicely that the flask is not dead. Application one we hear a lot is that there's a need for low-cost, medium throughput fermentation platform. I think that's what we just discussed a little bit, this idea of I want to have bioreactor capabilities, but I don't want to pay the $500,000+ prices sometimes asked for the throughput that I need. So there must be something in the middle. And maybe, Julius, do you have a point here that you can give us from market insights on this application?
I would say 2 categories of customers would really benefit from this. The one is academia, because they maybe don't have the money to spend, the budget to spend on more if they already have some, or at all their first benchtop bioreactors. I mean, same applies for startups actually, who, exactly, get some funding and then can only buy 4 benchtop bioreactors and that's it. That's their limited throughput then. But the other category is, we have these big white biotech global players as customers already. And they have the Ember 250, not all of them, some of them, and they still use it. Like, they can pay this price and they also keep using them even in these rough times now. But they are all looking for more throughput and more fermentation capabilities. And if it's the shake flask, that's great. If it's a bioreactor, that's also great. But they are all suffering from, let's say, the expensive benchtop bioreactor systems that are out there.
I would agree. And whoever thinks that cost is not a key pressure in any of those industries. Of course, maybe if we take biopharma out, but even there it's becoming more apparent. But we're talking fermentation and shake flasks are from flavor and food and ingredients and enzymes. So, chemistry, energy, and, in all of those, cost pressure is way higher. Okay, so I think we cannot simply ignore this fact. And there's a reason why people tell us if you could bring bioreactor capabilities to the flask level, this would be highly interesting. The second one is interesting because it comes almost from the people who already have these really big workflows around, let's say, bioreactor, MTP, scaling to Ember, going to benchtop reactor, right? One could say, yeah, for them, they don't need this. But it's actually exactly them that have told us, well, there is a need for an ad hoc screening tool outside the main workflow. Meaning they sometimes have a subset of experiments where they feel, I just want to get a directional instinct on my strain, on my media, on my bioprocess conditions. For example, how does fat batch behave compared to batch? How does this substrate, help versus the other one, right? And you're just trying to get a rough idea. And people basically say to use then my full workflow and the machinery and all of this sometimes can feel too much simply, and that's why they see this need. What insights do you have on that application?
Yeah, I would say ad hoc screening and also characterizations are really something that we heard quite a bit already, even with our first product, the CGQ, which can only monitor the biomass, and where we have, for example, where I sold many CGQ systems to a pharma customer in Germany. They are a French company, but they have a big white biotech, or let's say not a white biotech, but a microbial site in Germany. And they have a very well-established bioreactor pro to benchtop bioreactor Ember 250 workflow, where they usually do the early process development, not really strain engineering anymore. And then they're happy with that. They don't really need to put the shake flask in between those 2 platforms. But if they have a new strain, or once they have a new strain and it seems kind of promising, they get it from the, screening department, molecular biologist department, they want to have a very detailed characterization. How does this thing grow in whatever, their standard medium, for example, under their standard conditions? And there they really use the CGQ as a platform to get a detailed characterization of such a strain, which is, I also know that another customer told me it's like getting to know a new strain. Like you see this growth profile in a detail that's otherwise hard to achieve. And that's then kind of, you have that as your starting point, and that's very valuable to them.
Yes. Then we have the third category. This is more direct bioreactor use cases. I think the first one is self-explanatory. Almost every bioreactor experiment starts in a shake flask at one point when you start with a little bit of media and a little bit of culture and you need more. And people just try to make sure that these seed trains are better controlled. And then the second one is we actually do have people that say, hey, we need to produce only in small batch. We're not even aiming to go to pilot scale or production scale because we just need a smaller amount of product, and basically say, if we had a small bioreactor shake flask, we may be able to already produce exactly the amounts that we need, but that we maybe can't achieve at the moment in a flask, and why we have to go to a bioreactor at the moment. Maybe you elaborate a little bit here, Julius.
Yeah, it's, I think especially like companies focusing on custom enzymes, custom plasmids, mRNA is maybe also something where you don't produce, because you don't need to produce in cubic meters, or maybe not even in a 10-liter benchtop bioreactor, because your customer doesn't need that kind of volume and that amount of product. And for them, really a larger shake flask, 1 to maybe 5 liters, can then replace a bioreactor. Yeah.
And last but not least, AI is a hot topic everywhere, and I think we can all agree that it has a huge potential for bioprocessing. But the data needed to train models here is not as simple as just crawling the web for available public information. But this is really detailed knowledge data that you know of difficult to get parameters. And I think we can all agree that this will happen over the next years. And people need to generate more bioprocessing data. And then again, we are back to cost. Generating this at an acceptable price point will be crucial. And again, I think that's where a shake flask platform could definitely make a big difference. We are not there yet, but we have kicked off projects in exactly this direction. So let's see how well the shake flask stacks up there. Julius, take us through what we have learned in today's session, and maybe end also with your words on, is the shake flask dead or is it not?
Well, that's where we start. I think we definitely showed, and I hope we proved, that the shake flask is not dead. As you said, it might be dead in regards to the old shake flask that is not monitored, that is not controlled, that does not feel up to date anymore. But if you have the right tools, it can also be a modern shake flask and is definitely not dead. We also showed that there is a large variety of different workflows and also many different available bioprocess development tools. Sometimes the shake flask is maybe not the best tool, but also sometimes other tools are not the best ones, and the shake flask still fits there. I hope you also learned, because I think this is a key takeaway, there is not always the one right tool or scale to do everything. If you have different applications, different challenges, different projects you're working on, a different tool or a different scale might be better than the one that you used before. And yeah, also something we highlighted is there is still a gap between a shake flask and really an advanced stirred bioreactor, but we are trying to narrow this down, and it will hopefully even become better in the future. And last but not least, we believe that the modern shake flask, so a shake flask with sensing and control, will play a key role in screening and maybe even more in the early bioprocess development, but also for AI, as all the data that you need to generate will probably not come from the limited benchtop bioreactors or bioreactor runs.
Awesome. I think we have done a really good job as scientifically driven mythbusters today. And since we enjoyed this so much, it's a good transition to our next episode. So we hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, then we strongly recommend you watch the next one, where we return as mythbusters, looking at the myth that scale up from shake flask always fails. Because that's also kind of one of the big rumors about flask. So we thought, let's look at scientifically. Let's look at this scientifically. Is it true or is it not? Until then, if you would like to have this PowerPoint presentation or have any questions, as always, you can write us an email at insights@scientificbio.com. You can leave a comment below. We strongly suggest you follow us, for example, on LinkedIn or other social media platforms in order to stay tuned. Also, our newsletter that makes sure you don't miss the next episode. And otherwise, we would like to thank you for listening or watching, and we hope to simply see you next time. Have a nice day.
Thank you. See you in the next one.